Welcome to The Art of Humanity. I'm your host, Jessica Ann. This is my podcast where you can listen for fresh perspectives with artists, leaders, authors, and your favorite entrepreneurs. You can explore creativity and consciousness, evolve your business with the art of humanity. Now, here's this week's episode. Welcome to episode 68 of The Art of Humanity, where we explore creativity and consciousness with authors, artists, and entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Jessica Ann. We're entering the last half of the year, and I hope it's filled with joy, love, and peace as we are winding down. Right now, we are being called to birth a new frequency on Earth that guides conscious leaders on how to use their voices to transition the globe into higher consciousness. And yeah, I work in marketing, an industry that's very tangible, very practical, results-driven. But there's a softer side of marketing, and it's filled with empathy, inspiration, contemplation, more people enjoying the slow lane. When we reframe how we view marketing, we can create content that uplifts, inspires, and evolves our humanity. Because most of humanity is operating from an outdated frequency, like a radio station that's been playing the same tune. This frequency has sealed off this planet from accessing a higher consciousness. But here's the thing, being a conscious content creator pierces through this frequency shield. It makes information personal, it builds a deeper relationship with your audience, and it humanizes your brand. Creating content activates feel-good chemicals. When you speak and share information, you release dopamine throughout your brain. This feel-good chemical is responsible for pleasure and lighting up your mind's reward centers. I personally experienced this transformative effect firsthand when I helped to launch the podcast initiative for SiriusXM Radio. I worked with world-class talent like Oprah and Bob Edwards to get their voices out into the world in a way that wasn't mainstream. When the distribution strategy changed from satellite radio to podcasting, the host's voice were now going direct into the ears of listeners. A pretty intimate experience, just like the intimacy of how you're hearing my voice right now. Creating content activates who you are in the world. Just imagine being a podcast host or a content creator that's making a real impact in the world. What comes up? Maybe it's fear, maybe it's excitement, maybe it's imposter syndrome. You're totally normal. Transformations require an identity shift. Human content allows you to quantum leap. If you're looking for a sincere way to connect with others, podcasting is one of the most powerful channels today. Your podcast can take listeners to places where the intellect doesn't go. It anchors in the new you and activates your higher self. If you're a creative visionary wanting support or guidance with your conscious content creations, shoot my team an email at hello@jessicaannmedia.com with content in the subject line to apply to work with me. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by my good friend and colleague, Asa Idoni. And one of the things I love the most about this new creator economy is that we are constantly in collaboration mode. Asa is the owner and creator of the music project Source Vibrations, found at sourcevibrations.com, as well as YouTube and Spotify. He's a hypnotherapist and NLP practitioner, sound healer, composer, artist, and mystic, whose music and sound healing sessions have benefited people all around the globe. Source Vibrations listeners enjoy Asa's unique approach to methods of composing brainwave entrainment technology and intentionally tuned vibro-acoustic music. Asa employs geometric, mathematical, and archetypal elements to inspire his creative process and to encode healing intentions into his compositions. With his work, he creates nourishing musical experiences that assist his listener in accessing states of consciousness where deep healing and change more readily occur. In today's episode, we discuss how different frequencies affect our well-being, how the ritual of intentions in music can recalibrate our systems to be more in tune with nature, how the 432 Hz tuning can repattern our brains and heartbeat to be more embodied. We also discussed how cosmology provides meaning that can uplift our soul, Buckminster Fuller's Biomimicry, how we can tune ourselves into a work of art through sincerity and receptivity. If you enjoy this podcast, please go on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. It only takes a few seconds, but it really works wonders in allowing new podcast listeners who wouldn't normally find my show to be able to listen in. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Let's go to the show. Welcome to The Art of Humanity, where we explore creativity and consciousness with authors, artists, and entrepreneurs. Today, I'm joined by my good friend, Asa Idoni. Asa, welcome to The Art of Humanity.
Thanks, Jessica.
Asa, thanks so much for your amazing vision and the healing and the music that you bring into the world. I have been listening to Source Vibrations since I first stumbled on your YouTube channel 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So there are not many pieces of art that I stick with for too long of a time. You know, you kind of outgrow some types of teachings and you move on to the next big and better thing. But your sound healing has been one of the most consistent pieces of art that I have tuned into over the past 6 years of my life. So I really just want to commend you on the profound magic that you create.
Wow, I'm touched by that. Thank you so much for your support. I'm glad that it's a benefit to you.
Absolutely. So I would love to jam with you today about consciousness and technology and how we can kind of use the technology at our fingertips and going through our ears to evolve our humanity. I know that's kind of a really big leap and big first question, but how do you see the music that you create that goes into your listeners' ears all over the globe? How do you see that it helps evolve our humanity?
Yeah, it is a big question. And there's so many different threads that we could pull on to kind of get into that. It's hard to narrow it in. I think, just from a base level, art itself is a really important element to life. If it wasn't for music, the world would be just a completely different place. It plays an important role in our social experiences, in our inner states of consciousness, in giving us a sense of aliveness, and it enriches our inner experience in a profound way. And that's something, I've always been just so into music because of how much better life is when I'm, taken out of myself and I'm taken into an experience, and it brings me into this expanded realm of awareness and relaxation. So, just to have a musical experience, a sensual sound experience, really can bring us into a state of relaxation and enhance our present moment connection to what is. And for that reason, I think my music, specifically having that intention to really support people in dropping into their flow state and dropping into their present moment awareness, helps to create that shared intention between myself as a composer and the listener, so that we're on that same wavelength. Like we're in this sensory experience right now with a purpose to drop into a subtler, deeper, more nourishing level of consciousness. And I think that really does have an impact on the experience.
Absolutely. I love that answer. And I think, you said it yourself, the sensual sound experience brings us into a state of relaxation, which is so damn important today in a day and age when everyone is, stressed and,
trying everything that they can to really be more aware of their, nervous system and how we're all running around like in a frenzied state. We really have the ability to always drop into the present moment with that shared intention and to get on that same wavelength. And there are so many ways to do this, but I've really found that music is one of the quickest, not like there's just like an easy quick fix for everything, but when you turn on some really soothing, relaxing music, it's hard to just not feel the energy and the frequency of that music. So can you tell us more about the different frequencies and the different waves of energy that, come through your art and how they have that effect on listeners?
I can try. It's such a subtle and ineffable element of it. And when I start to talk about it in too concrete a way, it sounds like I'm pointing to something linear and causative, and it's much more fluid than it might sound when I'm talking about it. But
totally understand. Yeah.
With the genre of music that I like to play with mostly is really ambient electronic music, and certainly that genre alone is quite suited for slowing down the nervous system and bringing you into a more subtle state of awareness, and just kind of the pace of that sound environment really does kind of turn down the dial of our active mind a little bit. So there's one kind of general element, and then within the music experience that I'm trying to cultivate for people, I include oftentimes things like binaural beat frequencies to entrain the brain into subtler states of consciousness like alpha or theta. In that sense, there's an actual neurological correlate to what's happening when you're listening with headphones, and you actually can measure that through EEG and see that, the brain is slowing down, and now we're entering into a more coherent state of consciousness on a subtler level. That's one element, and I use that quite heavily throughout my music. But then there's also the tuning component of it. I've become very interested and really engrossed in some of the esoteric ideas around sound frequency and mystical mathematics, and how there can be these energetic signatures that are somewhat enfolded geometrical patterns, mathematical patterns, and numerological correspondences. A 432 hertz tuning, for example, is one that I use heavily. And then there are others as well with what's been referred to as the Sophagio frequencies. And the idea behind these intentional tunings is to bring the wavelengths of the frequencies into more of a correspondence and alignment with some of the patterns that happen in nature. So, we find certain ratios and proportions that happen throughout nature. The phi ratio or the golden ratio, for example, shows up in a lot of places. And we can find this same mathematical proportion start to show up in some of the ratios of the frequencies and their correspondence to geometric forms. So that gets kind of super out there. The shorthand way of looking at it is that, when we want to create something that has an added therapeutic benefit or an extra intention that's saying, like a prayer or what I call a ritual of intention, that intention is drawing on some sort of a philosophical notion or a archetypal notion or a mystical notion, and giving it embodiment in the structure of the music. And, to whatever degree that has kind of causative or scientific impact is not known, but I think there is a powerful effect that comes through as a result of actually giving your intention something concrete, so that it can be expressed through a piece of music.
Beautiful.
So yeah. And that's a kind of ritual practice that has become a part of my composition process.
I love it. And I mean, I think there's something so inherently beautiful about, these different frequencies, the esoteric and mystical, mathematic, geometrical patterns that you embody in your music. Joseph Campbell said, the goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match your nature with nature. So I love that quote. And I really think that, through these frequencies, the 432 hertz tuning that listeners have the opportunity to listen to, we can repattern our brains and our minds and our heartbeat to be embodied with nature more so, because I think there are a lot of deeper powers at play that want us to go the opposite, that want us to be counterclockwise, when nature is all about clockwise. There are these powers at play, especially right now, at this time in history. They've been throughout history, but especially right now, that are countering our inherent natural nature. Can you speak to that a little bit, and how the ritual of intentions that you include in your music are recalibrating our systems to be more in tune with nature?
Well, I want to kind of pan back a little bit and point to the moon. And I think maybe some of your listeners will be familiar with some of the ideas that relate to cosmology and mysticism and spirituality. There's an idea within the perennial philosophy and the world's great mystical traditions that the universe is a highly ordered, super conscious superorganism, and that this pattern of unity is a part of every aspect, every element of life, from the molecular level up through cells and organisms and beyond. And that the single unifying element between all of the different domains and degrees of the life process is a set of patterns and principles, laws. I guess you could call them laws, universal laws. And these laws, they're knowable. They're knowable, and they are possible to come into direct contact with them and live life in alignment with those laws, as nature does automatically. Our human consciousness, we've kind of gone into this disjointed way of being, where we see the world as being just parts. We don't see wholes. We don't see the integrated whole, and we don't see the magnificence and the beauty and the symmetry and the splendid order that's this just perfect creative process that's ever renewing itself. We're pretty much solipsistically focused on, just getting our needs met and, working our way through the world best we can. And we don't always think much about what are we and how did we get here and what is life for and how is it designed and what might we be able to learn about its nature and function and purpose and these sorts of things. And so our default state is separation from this magnificent creative principle. And in, aspiring toward a more whole way of being, a more aware and conscious and enlivened and inspired way of being, we can reach into the hidden aspects of nature, into the deeper interiors of, mathematics and biology and cosmology, and start to see these patterns emerge that point to kind of meaning that can uplift the soul. And so in just simply seeking deeper understanding of the nature of nature, we're elevated. We're taken beyond our blinders in some way and are delivered into a more complete picture of what the universe actually is. And, for those of us who've stormed the gates of heaven, so to speak, attempting to realize the inner nature of nature and aim ourselves toward the fulfillment of it and possibilities, there tend to be kind of little functional bits of insight that can get applied to our lives in concrete ways. There's a concept I really like. I think I learned it from Buckminster Fuller's work many years ago.
I love his work, yeah.
On this notion of biomimicry, where, as a biologist, you can see how there are certain structures and features within the natural world. And if you're an architect, for example, you can make some of those similar observations and then apply them to your particular field. As an architect, you can take, natural features in biological world and use them as a part of your architecture and make more organic structures or make stronger structures. Like the egg, for example, chicken egg is much stronger of a shape than it would be if it were in any other kind of oblong type arrangement. And because nature has found this perfect way of creating the right amount of strength and the right amount of elasticity so that just the right processes can happen and the chick can be protected and break through. And so applying those structures over to architecture can yield similar benefits. And this is a really interesting concept because when nature has spent millions of years trying to figure out the best way to do things, and what if we just look to nature and the cosmos and see what we can learn there, especially those things, those universal principles or patterns that are ubiquitous. And because if it's ubiquitous, then obviously nature thinks that's really important to continue to repeat again and again, like the golden ratio, for example, and then decide we're going to start applying that to our own works of art or musical compositions in my case. Something about the act of doing that for me is practice of devotion, is a practice of honoring and acknowledging and worshiping the intelligence of nature and creation. And I'm uplifted by that. The devotional practice for me, that's a benefit to me as a composer and as a seeker of the mystery. And I think other people have a sense of the significance of that act as well. That something about tuning ourselves into a work of art that has that kind of care and heart in it. It can bring another element of our inner sincerity to the surface of our consciousness and open us into a deeper level of receptivity toward the potential for the sacred to reveal itself to us in those moments. And that's been my aspiration in composing music and using these natural elements to kind of resonate those universal laws. I like to call it cosmomimicry.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if that really answers your question.
It does. Yeah, that definitely does. That was a great answer. I love that answer. And I think it's so key to really have that inner sincerity, the potential for the sacred in every moment. Tuning ourselves into a work of art isn't just something we say. We actually have to embody that. We have to practice that. And that requires a lot of fine tuning of our frequency. And I think there's a lot that's going on right now in this time in history that we are becoming more aware of, and that, whatever we choose to pay attention to largely determines what we experience. The more that we focus on beauty, the more that beauty becomes the centerpiece of our experience. And I think it's more the subjective experience of our lives are coming more alive today. And we're actually starting to see that this is one of the greatest scientific discoveries of all time. It's quantum physics. And, I interviewed Paul Levy in episode 65 of my podcast, and we dived in much deeper onto this. But I think it's all interrelated, and it unequivocally points out that the universe and the study of consciousness are inseparably linked. And when we really fine tune our energy and our frequency, and we see that we are already encoded with the natural frequencies of nature, we can see these patterns emerge so effortlessly. And then we see that we are the golden ratio. And I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit more about what the golden ratio is. You alluded to it earlier, and how we are all these amazingly beautiful works of art.
Yeah. So can we create in the same way that the Creator creates has been a big part of my meditation. And the golden ratio is a really interesting ratio. It's essentially fundamental algorithm that the nature uses in pattern building process. And we can see it in so many different things, from, pine cones, the double spiral of the pine cones, the nautilus shell. We can see it in the ratio between differentiation of branches within trees and plants. And
it's sacred geometry, right? For lack of a better.
Sacred geometry, yeah. It's essentially the initial pattern, and it comes out of the pentacle. If you look at the pentacle, it's the A portion is to the B portion, as the B portion is to the whole. It shows a kind of unitive asymmetry between levels, complexity, or degrees of complexity. And so, like, the human form itself is a magnificent expression of this golden ratio pattern. I mean, we can see this from, if you look at your hand, which is itself a kind of microcosm of the pentacle, because of the 5 fingers. The first knuckle is to the second knuckle on any of your fingers, as second knuckle is to the whole finger. And same with the entire hand, and the hand to the elbow, and the hand and the elbow to the entire arm. And so we're essentially this walking expression of this sacred geometric form. And it even goes down into our neurological systems and our cardiovascular systems, where there's these branching patterns that are also structured according to this universal pattern. So for me, learning about sacred geometry, and learning about how the human body and how nature has built all of these magnificent and beautiful forms out of this pattern, it's made me think in terms of creating in a similar way. And
it's like I'm just reminded of the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, the Vitruvian Man, if listeners aren't aware, I'm sure they may have seen it, but it's a drawing that is just a beautiful illustration of exactly what you're talking about. It depicts what you're explaining in a visual way.
Yeah, and he was one of the artists who started to realize our concept of beauty is linked to this intuition of divine proportion. And so throughout a lot of his artwork, you can see how he encoded the golden ratio through perspective and depth and orientation and all of these things. And, even just looking out across a horizon, if you were to watch a mountain kind of in its peaks and valleys as it climbs through the distance, and if you were to take a snapshot of that and measure how the distance between the height of the peaks are arranged, you would find these approximations to the golden ratio throughout. Just our entire landscape and our entire view of the natural world is full of the approximation to these ratios, and that's linked to our sense of beauty. We are awestruck by the beauty of nature to some degree because of the resonance that our visual experience has to the internal golden pattern. It seems to me, anyway. So this is a really significant thing, and it's always made me wonder. Okay, so how do I bring that principle into music that I create? And so I started pulling music apart, music mathematics and music theory, and I saw that, the golden ratio is already there, and it's almost that you can't really even create music without engaging the golden ratio on some level. And I'm like, so where isn't it that I could bring it to that particular place? And I found that it can be done in a somewhat auspicious way through brainwave entrainment music. There's a relationship in brainwave entrainment music, there's these different components, because it's essentially, for the people who don't know, it's 2 different frequencies played into each ear individually. So you have to be wearing headphones, a binaural experience. And the difference between the two frequencies actually creates a third frequency. It's not an actual frequency, but it's a perception of a frequency that you get as a result of your brain trying to reconcile the difference. They call that the beat frequency. So you can have this beat frequency at a golden ratio to the carrier frequencies. This is just an interesting experiment that I've played with that I found to be somewhat nourishing and fruitful. A lot of binaural beat frequency music is kind of arbitrary. They set a carrier frequency at like whatever, and then they set the binaural beat to wherever they want people to go. And so 7 hertz, for example, is the upper theta level, and you can have a beat frequency on any carrier frequency. There's really any number of them, but there's only a certain range of frequencies that are truly effective for entraining the brain into that state.
Wow.
But with this intention, you can align the carrier frequency and the beat frequency at this very particular ratio. And then over time, also is another way to encode it. So, you listen to a track and maybe the track is an hour long or something. And there's a certain period of time it takes from the beginning of the track for your brain waves to come into alignment, to come synchronize with that frequency. And then you decelerate the frequency over this period of time in order to reach the target brainwave state, which maybe is theta or maybe is delta. And so that period of time is called the deceleration protocol. It's how much does the frequency decelerate over what amount of time. And so anywhere there's time involved in a piece of music, you can also encode the golden ratio process. So I found that if you actually encode the deceleration protocol, the time it takes to reach the target state, to the golden ratio, the entrainment happens much more consistently, and it feels more natural, and like you're not getting there too soon, you're not getting there too late. It's just the right amount of it's the right amount of space to go from wherever we are, which is usually beta or upper alpha, to a more subtle state. So that's one of the ways of applying that golden principle.
Wow, I find this so fascinating because, you mentioned that the third frequency, I don't know if a lot of people know that. That's really new information. I think a lot of people might listen to binaural beats, not really knowing that it creates that third frequency, the beat frequency, as you said. So, and a lot of the times when I try to listen to other binaural beat channels, I can't do it. There's something off about it. I don't feel as centered and calm as I do when I listen to your channel. I'm not just saying that, Asa. I mean, you clearly have put in the work and the methodology to produce the art that has a deceleration protocol, as you just explained. So when that third beat is created, where does that go? I mean, it's going into our brains for like the brainwave entrainment, but like, is that going to the pineal gland, or is it going to a specific part of our nervous system to recalibrate? Like, it can't just be a beat that like drifts off into the multiverse, can it?
Well, it's experienced by the auditory processing centers of the brain. It just isn't actually there, which is an interesting phenomenon. So, I mean, we're built through bilateral symmetry, right? We have 2 lobes of the hemisphere. We have 2 eyes, and we look out to the world, and we actually have one unified experience of our visual perception. But actually, we're taking 2 different inputs and connecting them together in our visual center. And so we have out of these 2 inputs, we actually have one whole perceptual experience. This is a metaphor, I think, a very profound expression of deeper cosmic reality, which is that we live in this kind of dualistic universe. And out of, everything is built into opposites, and we really can't have any kind of experience or perception if it wasn't for there being 2 opposite and complementary or contradictory components, light and shadow, past and future, up and down, everything is dualistic. And yet we, as these conscious entities, have the capacity to collect information from two opposite and contradictory streams and unify them into a singular whole. And so, I think actually that's a deeper part of the purpose of the human instrument, is to include and transcend these opposite and contradictory energies and perceptions. So, that's a little kind of abstract from where you were going with the binaural beat, but I think it's very much relevant because our experience is something that is it's an emergent property of the sensory data that's coming in. We're not actually experiencing the sensory data. We're processing sensory data, and then we're creating meaning out of that based on the summation of all of our prior experience. And out of that can potentially come something totally novel. Mm-hmm. And I think binaural beat frequencies is one really kind of simple and fascinating way of applying that technology for the improvement of consciousness and cognition.
Definitely. And I think it goes back to the subjective states, which are non-dual. And it allows, listeners, it allows people to really tap into that non-duality state of existence, which we're always in. Mature state of consciousness. We're always there, but life and the world tries to make us feel separate from it. So I guess, what are some other ways that we can tap into this polarity, the light and the dark? It's just so beautiful when we integrate these polarity teachings into our lives, because I love a good paradox. I love bringing, the left and the right brain, the light and the dark together, the sacred and the profane. When we embody the polarities of life, we really become more whole. We become integrated beings. And that's a beautiful process. So, yeah. I mean, I'd love to kind of maybe get a little bit more out of the abstract and more concrete into the earth plane. How would listeners maybe appreciate or integrate some of the non-dual components of the cosmos into our very human experience?
Yeah. Well, so if you've ever read any of the mystical literature and compared some of the claims that are made there with your own experience, you've probably run into some pretty significant paradoxes or dichotomies. The concepts of unity are contrasted with our experience of division and individuality. I mean, pretty much everything that I've encountered in the mystical literature has, on some level, been a contradiction to what my direct experience has been. And so there's these very difficult challenges. They're puzzles of sorts, reconciling, for example, the absolute ideas of the nature of the cosmos and its freedom from time, its timelessness, its all-pervasiveness, so that it's perpetually everywhere, in all places, at all times. This singular intelligence source is in all things, and yet it remains itself, ever itself, undifferentiated, infinite, timeless. So how can that happen? How can that be the case when actually I'm just looking at these atoms and, I'm me and I have this history, and obviously I'm not, the universe. I'm just this lame dude. So how do we reconcile those paradoxes? And it's something I struggled with for a long time and experimented with lots of different tools, resources to try and figure out how to close the gap between the claims that are made in the mystical literature and what my experience is actually showing me. And, I found meditation probably the single most effective way to address those challenges, those paradoxes, and actually come into an increasingly comprehensive connection with the unitive aspect that's beyond those opposites. So ambiguity and abstraction is very difficult for us to deal with because we're very much focused in this rational linear type of thinking. So we want things to be very neat and concrete, cause and effect relationships. If you do this, you'll get that result. And, so we function within that realm. The neuroscientists, some of them call it the default mode network, which is this part of our neurology, our brain activity, where we're referencing ourselves. We're thinking about how things feel inside of ourselves, the place where we tell stories about who we are and what we need, and all of these things that are very much personal and unique to ourselves. And this is where we get into our anxieties and our insecurities and our addictions, and all of these things kind of function within that default mode network. But to exit that limited frame of consciousness into something more comprehensive and expanded requires some kind of a inner process where we include and transcend those paradoxes and those opposites. So the alpha state, for example, is very well suited to transcending these opposites and getting us out of our default mode network. And so, working with a, alpha brainwave entrainment audio program, or even just a meditation practice or breathwork practice, puts us into that alpha state, that flow state. And we've all noticed at times when we've been totally engrossed in doing something creative or super engrossed in our work, and we're not actually in our thinking mind. We're not using language inside of our brains. We're actually connected totally and completely to the action that we're doing. And, time can fall away, and we are the thing that we're doing. And that, that is essentially being the flow, which sounds kind of cheesy, but it's true. We are being the flow. And so there is no duality, because we're not splitting ourselves out from the action that we're doing. There's just one whole experience, one whole movement of being beyond thought and beyond struggle and beyond analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So doing this kind of training, this kind of brain training or state training, really helps us to incrementally become more and more proficient in deliberately entering into those subtler and more unitive states of consciousness.
Beautiful. And yeah, I think it's really important. You mentioned meditation is one way to really tap into the human plane of existence. But it can be a tricky meditation process. A lot of disassociation can come up along that path, which that's a whole other topic in and of itself, which I maybe want to talk to you at a later date about. But let's just stick to more about how sound and voice can really be a way to dive more fully into our human experience. I think that our voices are a unique frequency to really convey to others, like your soul. It's our voices, and when we podcast or when we talk like in this way, it opens us up to a higher plane. And that's why I'm such a nerd about podcasting, because, when you change how you look at things, the things you look at change, like Wayne Dyer said. So instead of just seeing podcasting as a content channel, I actually see podcasting as a way to tap into a higher consciousness in the same way that some people tap into meditation, because we are so focused on our conversation and uplifting the consciousness of, not just ourselves, but, anyone listening right now, that podcasting and our voice becomes a way to allow us to uplift us into a higher plane. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. Well, your voice is your frequency, and we're such multidimensional beings. There are so many layers of information that are being conveyed when we're communicating, nonverbal, subtle information. And your voice is your energetic signature, is the channel for your soul to come into full expression. And so, that's a beautiful thing to bring to the whole process of of podcasting is this insight that you're communicating ideas and you're sharing ideas, but actually you're sharing your frequency, and your frequency will resonate with people who have a similar energetic energy within themselves. And you'll find that resonance and alignment with your listeners. And as you more fully express your higher energy, your inner truth, you'll lift yourself up, and you'll lift those up along with you who are receiving that frequency.
In a way, we become the consciousness observing the program. So we reverse engineer everything in a way. It's like we are, instead of seeing this content that we're creating as another channel, we reverse engineer it so that we are the consciousness observing it. And that's a trippy experience. It's a trippy way to look at life, I think, but it makes it that much more fun.
Yeah.
For sure. So, Asa, is there anything else that you would like to share with listeners?
What would you like them to take away from our transmission today?
Oh man, I think your voice is a transmission in and of itself. The frequency here is just so beautiful, and I want to stay here all day. But we're coming up on the hour, so I wanted to start to maybe share the resonance, or just share the frequency of our conversation with our listeners by, just saying that this is a sign. If you're listening to this and you listen to the end, I guess we are reverse engineering the way that we've always done life previously by tapping more truly and more fully and more dynamically into nature. And meditation and podcasting and speaking, using your voice chakra, it's all part of it. It's all connected. So I think when we look at life through this lens on reality, it becomes so much more exciting and vibrant. And, we exist in a space-time instead of time-space. And I think that's a whole other topic in and of itself. But those people that are into metaphysics might understand that we are kind of getting past the Newtonian era of living. And once we access this quantum approach, life gets really trippy, and everything becomes a subjective experience, and it's even more fulfilling than anything previously.
Yes. Yes, it really is. And there's an element to throughout my work, and an element that's really deepening, emerging in the collective is the idea of, devotional practices or spiritual practices. And more people are taking up practices of meditation and doing breath work or working with shamanic medicines. And they're really seeking to tune into a deeper part of themselves and more completely embody their soul and come into more comprehensive views of reality, so that there can be greater fulfillment and deeper intimacy with the invisible realms of reality, and find a truth that gives us more fulfilling meaning to our lives. And I think the point of a lot of my work and the inspiration behind it is to really create that space of celebration and encouragement for people to really embrace their spiritual practice, their developmental or evolutionary practice, by whatever means are most attractive to them, through whatever it is, meditation or breath work or listening to binaural beat frequencies, because there really is a distance to traverse between this kind of ordinary mindset, like the default mode network, this materialistic mindset of, life is meaningless and so what, or whatever it is, to one of being able to have the cognitive capacity to include more complexity, to be able to perceive more depth and more complexity throughout the universe or throughout the human world, and to experience more and more of the innate natural laws and the underlying intelligence of the field of consciousness. And over a lifetime of practice, we can really go very far in approaching that 0 point or that non-dual level of consciousness, where the complete picture of reality, its purpose, its exquisite beauty can be fully felt and fully sensed and fully appreciated within our conscious awareness. And, because I think for a lot of us, it's been an intuition where we felt like there's something more, there's something deeper, there's something holy that's out there that is somewhat hidden from view. And if we can just do the right process internally, we might reveal more and more of it to our conscious awareness. And that's absolutely true. We can practice state training and learn and recondition our nervous system. We can recondition our thought processes, our inner patterns of perception and belief to align more fully with the deeper layers of reality, until finally that mystery is perpetually unconcealing, is revealing itself again and again through all of the mundane interactions of our life. And so, I think that the takeaway that I would most like to leave people with is there's so much more to be seen and felt and experienced, so much more meaningful, deeper layers of what nature and what the human instrument can provide for us that can fulfill us beyond our wildest imagination. And there's no more worthy a quest to devote ourselves to than the realization of that evolutionary potential.
So exquisitely beautiful. I love that way of seeing the world. Asa, where can listeners go to find more of your work in the world?
They can go to sourcevibrations.com. They can go to YouTube. They can go to Spotify and just search Source Vibrations. We're starting a new state training course online, the one that you actually did, Harmonic Mind. And we go through a process of incrementally deepening into subtler states of consciousness using binaural beats and music. And so if anyone wants to experiment with the meditative process and accessing non-ordinary states of consciousness through sound frequency technology, come to Source Vibrations and check out our courses page where you'll find Harmonic Mind. We're launching the next course on the 7th of August. Great.
Okay. I will definitely put the link to your website in the show notes.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me, Asa. It's been a pleasure.
Mm-hmm.